Today we're talking with Marine veteran Jeremy Stalnecker, CEO of Mighty Oaks Foundation. Jeremy, doing some great things out there for veterans and PTSD. Before we get to talking about all that, take us back. Tell us what you did in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation to come on and talk. Such an important topic as those in the military transition. I served as an infantry officer with First Battalion, Fifth Marines, and I could go all the way back to my childhood. People always say, "Why did you become a Marine?" Um, I don't know the answer to that question, other than I can't remember ever wanting to do anything else.
Huh.
And so told my dad when I was a teenager I was going to enlist. He said, "You're going to go to college, and you can do whatever you want to after that." Got into a good college, and they had a great program. The Marine Corps had a great program working with the college. So I went through a commissioning program and served with 1-5. I did standard deployment, UDP, 31st MU deployment was my first deployment. And then I had already, it's kind of a long story, but I'd already put in my paperwork to transition out of the Marine Corps. 9/11 happened. We spun up and then we were stood down and it looked like we were going to miss the war. And so for me, it didn't make sense to stay in the Marine Corps, to go back to a peacetime standing. And that sounds ridiculous now, right? But at the
Yeah.
time, we thought this is a 6-month thing and we're going to be done. Um,
Yep. I remember it.
so yeah, so I decided I would get out, and then we found ourselves shortly after that in Kuwait, and we were part of the push into Iraq in March of 2003. 1-5 was the center axis of advance as we breached the berm, went into the country. Shane Childers was one of our lieutenants, first KIA of the war in Iraq, was one of our guys. Made our way to Baghdad. April 10th, we had the Battle of Baghdad, a major engagement for the division and certainly for 1-5, and then came home. And after we came home, I think I was home for a month and transitioned out of the Marine Corps and into my civilian life.
Wow. Yeah. So I remember I was sitting on the sidelines thinking we were going to miss the whole war
Yeah,
because it was over in like a few months. It's like,
right.
well, that's it. And
Right.
then in spring of '04,
Yeah.
I arrived when the Marine Corps went back to Iraq, and then it
Yeah.
continued on for 20 plus more years, and still kind of is
Yeah.
going on. Really
Yeah.
crazy times.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Crazy times.
none of us had any idea it was going to go on for that long. We thought it was going to
No.
be a Desert Shield, Desert Storm over in six
Yeah.
9 months done, but not the case. So, what was your transition like? You just come back from a major
Yeah.
overseas combat deployment. Probably didn't have a whole lot of time bandwidth to be thinking about getting out or preparing to get out. So what was your
No.
transition like?
One of the things for me, so I was married, we had two little kids. We were living in Oceanside outside of Camp Pendleton, and we were part of a good church community. And so when I started to think about getting out of the military, I talked to my pastor, what do you think I should do? Like, I don't have it. I have a college degree in criminal justice. I'm not going into law enforcement. So basically I have no marketable skills unless someone's looking for a gunfighter, right? And he said, "Hey, I have a place for you here at the church. Not a ministry position per se, but project management, that kind of thing. So if you want to, you're looking for a place to transition, you can transition here." And that was great for us. Our family was already there. Um, it's interesting because when I talk about transitioning, that transition from the military into a church community or a ministry community sounds like the perfect transition. But there were a few things that happened. One is my entire life had been pointed toward military service, and now I was out, um, had come off of a combat deployment. We were, from breaching the berm to fighting our way to Baghdad, fighting in Baghdad, and retrograding back. 30 days later, on a church staff working with volunteers. And I quickly lost myself in that, the identity piece, right? We talk about identity a lot, but lost myself, didn't know who I was or how I was supposed to respond. I became very frustrated and angry. And then what you just said happened. We were supposed to be done with the war. I had been serving on that church staff, again, frustrated and angry and upset about a lot. And then 1-5, along with the rest of the division, deployed back to Iraq. First battle, Fallujah, was a battle that my battalion and a lot of my Marines were involved in. Some of the young men that I had served with and trained had been or were killed in that and injured in that. And So I'm sitting in a job that, again, seems like the right transition, but I was not doing well. I was not doing well at home. Definitely not doing well as a staff member on that church staff. And then hearing about what my Marines were going through, I found myself in a pretty dark, desperate place. um, I was a disaster at home. I say this often, and not because I'm proud of it, but to my wife's credit, she stayed with me because, she loves our kids and really wanted to fight through what we were dealing with for our marriage. Um, and we got to the other side of that. It took a long time, took a lot of years. But really within that first 12 months after I transitioned out of the Marine Corps, I was able to get my feet back under me. And that was because of people that, like my wife, but a lot of other people that came into my life and confronted me lovingly, told me what I needed to hear, and didn't walk out once they told me what I needed to hear. They helped me walk through those next steps of transition. And so, man, when we talk about transition, I feel for people who are leaving a job that they loved. What's funny, right? And I don't know what it's like in the other services, but in the Marine Corps, we complain constantly about being in the Marine Corps until we get out or away from it, and then we complain
Oh
about
yeah.
not being in it. And so, it's a weird thing, but thankfully, I had the right people around me to get me back on track.
Yeah, I find it what I'm thinking of when I'm hearing your story. I find it interesting. You went from the Marine Corps full time into the church. You were already there anyways,
Yeah,
and you're a leader in the church. You're
yeah,
in an immersive environment that's essentially there to support people in time of need and through struggles
yeah,
and through life. You're surrounded by all the support you could probably ever ask for already, and yet you were still struggling.
yeah. Yeah. And there are a few things there as I reflect on that. One, it was 2003. So issues like, transition out of combat. You remember 2003? I mean, there were a handful of um, folks with combat experience on the planet, right? I mean, we could say there are
Yeah,
thousands, and there were, but
it's all brand new.
very, very, very small percentage. And so even in my church community, which was right outside of Camp Pendleton, I was one of very few who had combat experience. So I think even within that community, there was love and concern, and we want to help, but no idea how to do that. No idea how to
Right.
talk to me about that. I remember having a conversation with my pastor where he called me into his office. He's like, "Hey, man, like you're a disaster, and we've got to figure this thing out. I have no idea how to help you." Because again, this isn't stuff we were talking about. We weren't
Mm.
talking about trauma. We weren't talking about post traumatic stress. We weren't talking about transition plans and the rest of it in 2003. Um, and so that was one part of it. I think the other part, and for leaders, you can put yourself on an island, which I did during that time, where you need help, but because you feel like you're in a position of leadership,
Oh yeah.
you're unwilling to ask for help. And so I needed people to push their way into my life in order to get the help I needed. Because I was like, well, I'll be embarrassed, or people look to me, or whatever, the stuff you build up in your mind. And um, so, yeah, I just didn't get the help I needed. And that was in big part because I was really kind of protecting myself or whatever. It's silly to
Hmm.
look back on, but it's pretty dangerous too.
Yeah, I'm just a lot of folks that have similar problems. You know, they end up they end up solving their problems or getting help and getting rescued by going into the church afterwards. And it was just
Yeah.
interesting. Here's you're
Yeah.
already in the middle of it, and yet
Yeah.
you still referred to yourself as on an island. You're still
Mm,
isolated, even though you're surrounded by everybody and everything you could ask for
yeah.
as far as help is concerned, but yet you
Yeah.
still blocked it all out somehow.
Yeah.
It's
And that
very interesting. It just shows you it can happen to anybody, no
anybody.
matter what your situation is. You don't have
That's
to be
exact.
isolated. You don't have to be physically and geographically isolated to
No.
still be isolated.
You have to be willing to get help. And I think that's
Mhm.
the biggest key, right? Is um get help. And there are people around you. And thankfully now, whatever it is, 20 years later, 21 years later, there are a lot of opportunities for help, but people are still ending their lives, medicating themselves, stupid, right? Like we
Mhm.
still see all that. Why? Because even with as much help as there is available, and there was to me, we have to be willing to get that help. And that's the key to really moving forward.
And from a couple of things you said, were you struggling because of what you had experienced, or were you struggling because all your guys are going back without you and you're feeling the feeling of missing out?
Yeah, I think that was it. My entire life had been pointed to leading Marines in combat, right? And Marines understand this. A lot of other people don't get this, but for me, as an infantry guy, going to combat was the goal. And a lot of people would say, "Well, you want to stay away from that." For me, that was the goal for all of us. That was it, man.
Oh
Like
yeah, no, no.
that's what we wanted to do, and I was doing it. And again, this sounds silly, but as a young officer, I was just promoted to captain as I was getting out. My military life was open now. I mean, I was again one of few company grade officers that had combat experience. I had people that I respected reaching down to me saying, "Hey, I'm my B billet is over here and I want, people like you to come with me." So I went from that to now being in an environment where I didn't really know how to do what I was supposed to do. I was working with a lot of volunteers who were good people, but
Hmm.
weren't going to follow through. Um, yeah, it was a lot of frustration, and then I think what compounded that was, and now my Marines are going back to fight again, and I'm hearing about these, I call them kids. I was young then too, but hear about these young men being killed and being hurt and all this stuff, and I wasn't there. And what I was doing was very important, but it felt very, very unimportant.
Wow. All right, back talking with Marine veteran Jeremy Stalnecker, CEO of Mighty Oaks Foundation. So Jeremy, you're struggling with your own problems and things are happening. OAF2's happening, Fallujah 1. I was actually in Fallujah 1
Mm,
there. We were stationed in Al Taqaddum, TQ, right between Ramadi
yeah,
and Fallujah when Fallujah 1 kicked off. And
yeah,
so right there, flying over the top of your guys.
yeah,
So certainly relate to all that. Where did what was the catalyst? Where did the idea from for a Mighty Oaks Foundation come from?
yeah. So it's funny, we all deal with our, kind of struggles in different ways. For me, a big part of moving forward was kind of putting my Marine Corps service behind me. And I didn't stay connected to anyone that I served with. And that was intentionally. I couldn't handle it. So I went on and continued to serve in ministry and served in a couple of other, ministry roles. About 10 years after I came home from Iraq, one of the Marines that I served with reached out to me, and he had met another former Marine, Chad Robichaux, who was starting an organization called Mighty Oaks, and I didn't know anything about it. The Marine who reached out to me incidentally didn't know much about it, but he said he's trying to do this thing to help veterans and um, wants to get a bunch of us together. So I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'll do that, even if it's just so that I can see some of the Marines that I served with." And so we all met up in Colorado, and I met Chad, who was really starting Mighty Oaks, and he's super charismatic, and comes from a mixed martial arts background, and wants to do this thing, and he's pulling this thing together, but didn't have experience in teaching or programming and that kind of thing. And so we met then through this other Marine, and he said, "Hey, I'm getting this thing going. Would you be interested in helping me out?" I was actually pastoring a church at the time, and there's a lot of story behind that, but um, I had no interest in working with veterans. But that week, I was sitting there with 10 other Marines that I'd served with, and I started to hear stories of their struggles. And I was always so proud of the fact that although we had some Marines wounded in Iraq when I was there, we didn't have anyone killed. We did an incredible job. Um, and I brought those guys back and so proud of that. And then I started to hear stories. Again, I'd been separated from them for 10 years, stories of suicide, stories of broken families and homes, stories of hopelessness. And all of these young men that I was so proud I had brought home needed me when they got back.
Mm.
And I felt in a sense that I had walked away from them or abandoned them. And really that was when the light bulb came on for me that our military service doesn't end when we hang the uniform up in the closet for the last time. our commitment to each other, it continues. And so, working with Chad, we started to put this thing together and bring people in. And in the beginning, it was, we're going to have a small nonprofit. We'll do our best to raise money to bring people to where we can talk and help them with the struggles that they're dealing with. We'll do this a few times a year. And that grew to, now we have about 1,000 students a year. We have almost 40 weeks of programming a year in 5 locations across the country. And so it really began as an idea that was moving. It made sense. My heart was connected to it when I realized I have something to offer. I've lived through and learned through some things that I can help other people in their lives, and didn't care about the money, didn't care about fundraising, didn't care about any of those things. But those things became very important as we grew. And when we talk about, even entrepreneurship and those kind of things, really had to figure out, what does fundraising look like in this context? What does, accounting and bookkeeping and insurance, and then developing, a human resources department and all of the rest of it. We have, 30 plus full-time employees. We have over 100 people that work with us, a budget of several $1,000,000. What what does all of that look like? Well,
Yeah.
kind of the entrepreneurial spirit is we're going to start meeting the need and then figure the rest of it out as we go along. And thankfully, we were able to do that. A lot of hard work, um, but it brought us to the point where we are a strong business, if you will. A nonprofit is a business, a
Yeah.
strong
Oh, yeah.
business to support the important work that we started to do.
Right. And oftentimes what happens in the nonprofit world is people get consumed and overwhelmed with the business aspects of it, and they
Yeah,
lose sight of the mission. You hate it for
yeah,
that to happen. Or people, the founder, the guy with the vision stays with the vision and just does that and doesn't do any of the business aspects, and the whole thing falls apart because he's
yeah,
only focused on the mission, or he doesn't have somebody doing the back office stuff
yeah.
for them. So it's definitely a balancing act. Um, where the thing about being in the nonprofit world, you quickly find yourself in the fundraising business.
Yeah.
Um, Talk a little bit about that and what your experience with that was.
So we made a decision early on, uh, both of us being veterans and knowing veterans, that a program like ours dealing with post-traumatic stress and combat trauma and these other issues, um, the veterans we knew at the time, and now we work with active duty service members and first responders, but at the time, combat veterans coming home, the guys we knew were not going to come to a program like ours if there was a single barrier to entry, right? So if there was anything that would
Yeah.
keep them from coming, they were going to use that as an excuse. And so one of the big ones was money. It
Yeah.
costs money to run a program, and it costs money to travel to the locations where we have the programs. And so we made a decision early on. We were going to raise money to do both. So a student of our program, someone who comes through a Mighty Oaks program, won't have to spend $1 of their own money to attend our program. And that was an intentional decision to eliminate barriers. People have criticized us for that, but it's worked well for us.
Mm-hmm.
And what that then necessitated was us, raising, millions of dollars. I think over the last um, 10 years, we say we've raised over $50 million to run our programs. And
Wow.
that's a huge burden. And it starts by establishing something that is beneficial, is helpful. Our program works. And so as it works, there is word of mouth. That's how we started. We didn't start by advertising. We started by talking to the people we knew and bringing them to a place where they could get help. And then they would tell the people that they knew. And that would kind of expand the network of people that knew about us and needed help. That then expanded our need for fundraising. So we would communicate to others through social media. And for us, a lot of it is speaking at churches and speaking in community groups and doing, podcasts and other things. Start to tell those stories, the stories of success, and then explaining, but there's also a need. If you don't need to attend the program, then maybe you need to support those who are. And this is an opportunity for you to do that. And so we started to do that, and it brought in, great people who were supporting kind of at small levels. I say small, anything is amazing, right? But
Hmm.
$25 a month, those kind of levels, which is awesome. But as the program expanded and as it became more of a national program, we also drew some attention from larger capacity donors, some large businesses and others who have come alongside of us as well. So it's been that's always kind of the dog at your heels, right? Is if we're going to offer this program for free and we need a large kind of admin staff to facilitate 1,000 students in 5 locations across the country, then raising the money is constantly the thing that we have to focus on. And it's an infrastructure that we've been able to build. It's relationships that we've been able to develop, and we continue to do that. So that's a big part of what we do.
Would you say that most of your funding comes from the grassroots level, like those
Yep.
$25 monthly donations from
Yeah.
individuals, or do you got any of the big
It,
donors come in?
we have some incredible donors that bring in a substantial amount of
Hmm.
our yearly budget. However, by percentage, it's the grassroots donors. It's thousands of people across the country who,
Yeah.
they give $20 a month, $25 a month, or at our various fundraising times during the year, whether it's a Facebook fundraising, thing or one of our events they give. Um, it's crazy. People think that it's those large donors that support works like ours, which we have some great large donors and they do support a lot of our work. But without the grassroots, the mom and dad who have a son that was in the Marine Corps and they want to, support because of what he did, and family members of those who have attended our programs. If it wasn't for those folks, we wouldn't be able to financially function the way that we do.
Yeah. And that some say that's probably a harder way to do it because you got to deal with more people. But the nice thing is all your money's not dependent on one or two
Yeah,
big donors either. So if one of them
that
leaves, you're not dead in the water.
That's exactly right. And I talk to a lot of men and women who are trying to start a nonprofit and they're trying to figure all this out and they're asking these same questions. And they always have this idea that if I can just get that one big donor, if I can just get that one big person, the problem with that is you have an economic event that causes that person to pull back some of their charitable giving or cut off their charitable giving. And then you have nothing. It has to be both. And I think if you have to work hard at one or the other, again, the big donors are great. They've been such a blessing to us. But if you have to work hard at one or the other, develop that large foundation, go deep and broad, and you'll be able to sustain regardless of what happens. Those unforeseen things, those things you have no control over. So, yeah,
Wow.
it really is important to have a strong base of um, I say smaller. Every donation is important, but smaller donors.
Awesome. So talk about some of the programs that Mighty Oaks Foundation has,
Yeah.
what you guys are doing.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we serve veterans, active duty service members, first responders, and spouses. And we started as a combat veteran program, but we've expanded over the years, and particularly to first responders, understanding that those in the fire service, police officers are dealing with, so many of the same things that combat veterans are dealing with, but without a lot of the support. And so we have 5-day programs at one of 5 locations across the country where we will bring either men or women. We have separate programs for men and women. Um, Men are a lot more transparent when there aren't women around, and I think it'd be the same with women. So that's worked well for us. So we bring them to one of those locations, and we spend a week talking about trauma, what it is, what it isn't, how to move forward in spite of it. But a lot of it is just getting a hold of principles for moving forward in your life. That trauma will be there, but you can move forward in spite of it. All of our programs are taught by men and women who have attended our programs, who've come through our leadership training process. And so when someone's standing in front of a class or a group, they're not standing there as the authority speaking down. They're really standing there as I know where you're coming from because I've been there. I don't have it all figured out, but I'm a few steps further down the road than you, and I want to help you get there. So it's very much a
Hmm.
peer-to-peer program, which tears down a lot of the walls that veterans and service members put up, and allows us to move forward together. And so it's been pretty unique in that sense. after that 5 days, we have an aftercare program where we'll facilitate counseling and, resources that are needed. And there's a lot of things that are needed after that that we are equipped to help plug our students or our graduates into.
Wow. And can you talk numbers with us? Like, you know your numbers, like
Yeah,
how many folks have been through the program and that kind of thing?
sure. Yeah. So through our 5 day programs, we've had about the number change. We have programs, two programs going on right now. So we've had, I think, 5,300 plus men and women that have gone through
Wow.
one of our 5 day programs. And that's the core
5,300.
program that we have. And then beyond that, we do a lot of speaking in military conferences, resiliency conferences, and things like that. And we've spoken to, I mean, it sounds funny, but hundreds of thousands of active duty service members through those conferences. We speak at Marine Corps Recruit Depot every quarter. We have produced, if you go to our website, a lot of resources, books that can be purchased, but can also be downloaded for free. So we produce a lot of resources to get those in the hands of anyone that wants them. We have a little booklet on resiliency that we've given out hard copies, over 100,000 copies. So we've been really blessed with opportunities to get into a lot of places that people said we wouldn't get into. But yeah, it's been pretty amazing.
That's incredible. And how many years you've been doing this now?
We started in 2012,
Hmm.
and at the time we were all doing other things and this, but that's where we started. And like I said, this year I think the number is 38 weekly sessions in 24. Next year we'll be at 51 weekly sessions, and so we're constantly working to advance that. And we have some great partners, man. We have 5 locations, I mentioned that, but they're all owned by other people. But there are other people we've built relationships with that make that available to us, conference centers and things like that. They're typically like a ranch setting or retreat center setting, so it's serene, but it's separated from kind of
Hmm.
the busyness of the world, which works really well for us. So, we've had some great partners and it's been pretty fun, pretty crazy to be a part of, but pretty fun to see how things go from just an idea and getting things moving, and we don't know if this is going to work to where we are now.
Yeah, no kidding. And how many people, I think I heard you say you had like 30 employees now?
Yeah, we have 36 full-time employees, and then we have a lot of folks. We call them contractors. They work with us at some
Hmm.
point during the year for a week, up to 10 weeks. It depends on what they're doing, and we'll pay them as contractors, and that takes us to about 100. So we have about 100 folks that we pay every year to help facilitate our programs, and they use tons of volunteers, as you can imagine. Um, so just the management piece, this is funny. We're a nonprofit. We deal with trauma and all these things we talk about, but really what we do better than anything else is logistics and planning. Our programs team, probably the best logisticians anywhere, and they all come from the military, so they kind of have that mindset. But we're moving thousands of people around the country, buying thousands of plane tickets, getting volunteers and employees and contractors to all of these locations, and it's happening every week. So um, it's it's not something you could look at on day one and say we're going to do that. It would be too much, but you can grow into that. And man, for an entrepreneur who's building a business, someone who's building a nonprofit, build right in the beginning so that you
Mm.
can continue to build onto it. We've made a lot of mistakes, but constantly trying to shuffle and reshuffle our structure and put the right pieces in place so that we can keep adding and getting scale as we need to scale. And so that's been a big part of it for us, is how do we continue to scale this? What do we need to add? How do we need to structure so we can do that? And just the logistics behind what we do
Yeah,
is huge. But thankfully, we've got the right people in place, and we've been able to scale to a pretty high level.
build right in the beginning. Yep.
Yeah,
Helps to scale, it helps your scaling ability. So you don't constantly have to change
that's
everything and
right.
fix everything.
That's right.
Uh, um, how do we find out more about Mighty Oaks Foundation?
The easiest way is just to go to our website, mightyoaksprograms.org, mightyoaksprograms.org. But if you Google Mighty Oaks Foundation or Mighty Oaks Programs or even Mighty Oaks, you'll find us. And go to our website. You can apply there. Again, no cost to attend the program, just apply. And then our team will reach out to you and help you get the help that you need. And we have other ways that you can support as well, resources there. So just a great place to learn about us and get some resources for yourself.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jeremy, for sharing your entrepreneurial success story, and thanks for all the great things you're doing out there for our veterans in need. And look forward to seeing your future success and great business advice too. So really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, these two Marines are Oscar Mike.